The message arrived at 9:47 a.m. on Wednesday. Mom, Uncle Richard passed away last night. The funeral is Saturday. The will reading is Monday at 2:00 p.m. I stood in the deserted staff lounge at St. Jude Memorial Hospital, staring at my phone, having just wrapped up a 12-hour shift in the cardiac unit. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I had spoken to Uncle Richard just 3 days prior during our standing Tuesday evening call. He had sounded weary, though otherwise fine, grumbling about the Mariners' pitching per usual. We had discussed his garden, his current read, and entirely trivial matters, the rhythm of our relationship. "You okay?" My coworker Sarah asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. "My uncle died," I murmured. "Oh, Emma, I am so sorry." I nodded, unable to push words past the tightness in my throat. Excusing myself, I retreated to my car in the parking garage, where I sobbed for 20 minutes. Uncle Richard was 78. I knew this day was inevitable, yet that realization did nothing to blunt the pain. My phone buzzed again. "Mom, don't hold your breath for anything at the will reading. He barely knew you. We were his real family." I stared at the text for a long time. Then, pushing the pain aside, I drove to my small apartment in Beacon Hill, the one Mom loved to mention whenever she wanted to remind me that my older sister, Jessica, lived in a 4-bedroom house in Oak Creek. The funeral was exactly what I anticipated. Mom and Dad arrived early, dressed in expensive black. Jessica appeared with her husband, Matthew, and their 2 children. Jason showed up late, reeking of cologne. I had arrived an hour early just to have a final moment alone with Uncle Richard. The service was short, filled with the pastor's generic platitudes. Jessica wept loudly, Mom dabbed her eyes, and Dad remained stoic. I didn't cry. I had already done that. "I thought about Tuesday evenings," he said during the reception afterward at my parents' home in Maplewood. The family stood in clusters while I stayed by the window with a coffee. "I don't want this, Emma," Mom said, approaching me with her voice hushed. "We need to talk about Monday, the will reading." "Yes." She checked her surroundings before leaning in. "Your father and I have been talking." Richard's estate is substantial. The house alone is worth at least $1 million, and he had investments and savings. We're talking about significant money. "Okay." "We were his immediate family. Your father is his only sibling. It's only natural the bulk of the estate goes to us, with some portions for you kids." I stayed silent. "You have to understand," Mom continued, "that Richard barely knew you, Emma. You only visited a few times a year." "Every Tuesday for 6 years," I thought. "But you didn't know that we were the ones who truly looked after him," she said. "We were his real family, so when the will is read on Monday, don't expect anything significant. A small token would be appropriate." "Okay," I replied quietly. Dad approached us, drink in hand. "Emma, your mother is right. Richard and I were close. Brothers, you know how inheritance works. It goes to immediate family first." "When was the last time you saw him?" I asked. Dad frowned. "What?" "When was the last time you saw Uncle Richard? Before he passed?" "Christmas," Dad said. "We hosted him for dinner 8 months ago." They had hosted him for 4 hours on Christmas Day. I had been there, too. Uncle Richard had looked uncomfortable the entire time, trapped among the pricey decorations, expensive food, and haughty people discussing expensive things. "He seemed fine then," Mom added. "Healthy. It was very sudden." It wasn't sudden. Uncle Richard had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure 2 years prior. I had driven him to every cardiology appointment, collected his prescriptions, and used my nursing background to translate medical jargon into a plan he could follow. But my family knew none of that. Jessica joined us with a glass of white wine. "Are we talking about the will?" "Yes," Mom said. "I was just telling Emma not to expect much." "Obviously, the house goes to Mom and Dad," Jessica said. "They can sell it and use the funds for retirement. The rest should be split among us kids. Fair and equal." "We'll see what Richard decided," Dad said carefully. "Did he even have a will?" Jason asked, walking into our circle. "Of course he did," Mom replied. "He was very organized. His lawyer called to schedule the reading. Everyone named has to attend." "Everyone?" I asked. "You, me, your father, Jessica, Jason," Mom listed, "and a few others, I assume, probably some charities." Richard was sentimental like that. Sentimental? They thought Uncle Richard was sentimental. In reality, he was practical, logical, and direct. He had worked as a structural engineer for 40 years, retiring at 65 with a solid pension and smart investments. He bought his Riverside house in 1982 for $95,000. It was now valued at $1.2 million. I knew all of this because we had discussed it every Tuesday for 6 years. But my family thought he was just a sentimental old man who handed out candy to his nieces and nephews at Christmas. The reception eventually wound down. I helped clean up as I always did, while Jessica supervised and Mom directed. Dad retreated to his office and Jason left early, claiming he had plans. "See you Monday," Mom said as I prepared to leave. 2:00, don't be late. "And Emma," she added, touching my arm, "try to dress professionally. This is important." I drove home reflecting on the first time I had actually connected with Uncle Richard. I was 24, fresh out of nursing school, and drowning in student debt. I had gone to his house to drop off something Mom wanted delivered, and he invited me in for coffee. We talked for 3 hours. He was funny, intelligent, and asked about my work, really asked, and listened to my responses. No one else ever asked about my career. Before I left, he said, "You should come back next week." "I make pretty good coffee." I returned, and I kept returning. Every Tuesday evening for 6 straight years. You became my best friend, and no one in my family knew. They were aware I visited sometimes. Mom would occasionally mention it, usually as a criticism. "You should spend less time with that old man and more time building your career or finding a boyfriend instead of wasting your evenings." They never asked what we talked about. They never asked why I went. They just assumed I was being nice to a lonely relative. They had no idea he was the only person in my family who truly knew me. Monday arrived too quickly and yet not quickly enough. I took the day off. I dressed in my best professional attire, black pants, a white blouse, and a blazer, the outfit I had purchased for job interviews but rarely wore. The law office was in downtown Portland on the 34th floor of a sleek glass building. The waiting room offered floor-to-ceiling views of the Columbia River. Mom and Dad were already there when I arrived at 1:55 p.m., sitting on a leather sofa and whispering. Jessica and Matthew sat across from them, while Jason was in the corner, glued to his phone. "Emma," Mom stood. "Finally, we were worried you'd be late." "It's 1:55. The meeting is at 2. Early is on time is late," Mom recited, one of her favorite maxims. The receptionist smiled at me. "You must be Emma. Mr. Hartwell is expecting you. You can all go in now." We filed into a large conference room with a dark wood table, leather chairs, and law books lining the walls. It felt official and intimidating. A man in his 60s stood as we entered. "Good afternoon. I'm Arthur Sterling, Richard Chen's estate attorney. Please, everyone, take a seat." We arranged ourselves around the table. Mom and Dad took the power position. Jessica and Matthew sat beside them, Jason across from them. I sat at the far end, as distant from everyone as possible. Mr. Hartwell opened a leather portfolio. "First, let me express my condolences. Richard was a wonderful man. I had the pleasure of working with him for over 20 years. Mom nodded graciously. "Thank you. He spoke highly of you." Had he? I had never heard Uncle Richard mention his lawyer. "Before we begin," Mr. Hartwell said, "I want to clarify a few things. This will was executed 18 months ago in March of last year." Richard was of completely sound mind. The document was witnessed by 2 unrelated parties and notarized. It is legally binding. "Of course," Dad said. Richard also left instructions that I was to read the will in its entirety with no interruptions, then answer questions afterward. "I'd appreciate your cooperation." We all nodded. Mr. Hartwell put on his reading glasses. "The last will and testament of Richard Michael Sterling, executed March 15th, 2024. He read through the opening declarations, the standard legal language stating Uncle Richard was of sound mind, that this document superseded all previous versions, and that he had appointed Mr. Hartwell as executor. Then he reached the bequests. To my brother Daniel Chin and his wife Patricia Sterling, I leave the sum of $5,000 each, for a total of $10,000. Silence. Mom's face went rigid. To my niece, Jessica Sterling West, I leave the sum of $5,000. Jessica's mouth fell open. "What?" "Please hold questions until the end," Mr. Hartwell said gently. To my nephew, Jason Sterling, I leave the sum of $5,000. Jason put his phone down, looking confused. "The entirety of my remaining estate," Mr. Hartwell continued, "including my residence at 4728 Sunset Avenue, all bank accounts, investment portfolios, retirement accounts, personal property, and any other assets not specifically mentioned above, I leave to my niece, Emma Louise Sterling." The room went deathly silent. I couldn't breathe. "The estate has been valued at approximately $3.2 million, Mr. Hartwell said, continuing to read. "This includes the Riverside residence valued at $1.2 million, investment accounts totaling $1.7 million, savings and checking accounts of $200,000, and personal property and vehicles valued at approximately $100,000. Mom's face had turned stark white. "Richard also left a letter to be read at this time," Mr. Hartwell said. He pulled out an envelope. "To my family and to Emma, this letter explains my decision." He opened it and began reading in Uncle Richard's voice, practical, direct, and without wasted words. "To my brother Dan and his wife Patricia, you are good people. You worked hard, built successful careers, and raised 3 children. I'm proud of you, but let's be honest. You visited me once a year at Christmas. You called on my birthday and major holidays. That's fine. I don't fault you for it. You had busy lives. To Jessica, you're ambitious and driven. You've built a beautiful life. The few times you visited, you were polite but distracted, always checking your phone, always rushing to leave. That's okay. I understand. To Jason, you're young and still figuring out your path. The handful of times you came by, it was because your mother made you. You were bored the entire time. I don't blame you for that either. Here is the thing, though. For the past 6 years, Emma has come to my house every single Tuesday evening from 6:00 to 8:00 p.m. like clockwork. She never missed. Not once. She came when she was exhausted from 12-hour hospital shifts. She came when she was sick with the flu herself. She came during snowstorms and heat waves. She came when she had her own problems and worries. She didn't come because she had to. She came because she wanted to. We drank coffee. We talked about everything. She told me about her patients, about the struggles of being a nurse, about her dreams of maybe becoming a nurse practitioner one day. I told her about my career, about engineering, about your mother, her grandmother, who died before Emma was born. She listened to my stories. She laughed at my jokes. She cared about my opinions. When I was diagnosed with heart failure 2 years ago, Emma took me to every appointment. She made sure I understood my medications. She helped me modify my diet. She checked on me between our Tuesday visits, calling to ensure I was okay. She did this while working full-time, while dealing with her own challenges, while being dismissed and overlooked by her own family. None of you knew any of this. You didn't know because you never asked. You assumed Emma was just being nice, that she visited sometimes, that she was wasting her time with a boring old man. But Emma saw me, actually saw me, not as an obligation or a burden or a source of future inheritance, but as a person, a friend. She gave me something precious in my final years, her time and her genuine care. That is worth more than money can measure. So, I'm leaving her the money. To Dan, Patricia, Jessica, and Jason, your $5,000 bequests are not insults. They are acknowledgments, your family, I loved you. But Emma earned this inheritance through 6 years of showing up consistently and selflessly. If you're angry about this decision, I understand. But ask yourselves, when was the last time you spent 2 hours with me just talking? When was the last time you asked about my life, my thoughts, my fears? Emma asked. Every Tuesday for 6 years. That matters. With love and no regrets, Richard Chin. Mr. Hartwell set the letter down. The silence in the room was suffocating. I had tears running down my face and I couldn't stop them. This is insane, Jessica said, her voice shaking. This isn't legal. He was clearly manipulated. I assure you, Mr. Hartwell interrupted calmly, the will is completely legal and valid. Richard was evaluated by his physician 3 weeks before executing this will. The doctor certified that he was of sound mind and not under any undue influence. She's a nurse, Mom's voice was sharp. She had access to him, she could have. Mrs. Chin, Mr. Hartwell's voice was firm, I'm going to stop you right there. Any allegations of impropriety could expose you to legal liability. Richard made this decision freely and clearly. I was present when he executed the will. I spoke with him at length about it. He was absolutely certain. But $3 million, Dad said. He looked stunned. Richard was your family, your brother. And Emma is your daughter, Mr. Hartwell noted quietly. Richard's niece is also family. This is different, Mom insisted. He spent a few hours a week with him. We spent decades. With respect, Mrs. Chin, what matters is not the history, but the present. Richard makes that clear in his letter. Emma was present during his final years. That's what he valued. Jason was staring at me. You never told us about the Tuesday visits. You never asked, I said softly. $2 million, Jessica said. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, pure fury. You manipulated an old man. Jessica, Matthew put his hand on her arm, but she shook it off. No, this is fraud. We're contesting this. We have to. That is your right, Mr. Hartwell said. However, I must warn you that any contest will be expensive and, in my professional opinion, doomed to fail. Richard anticipated this possibility. He left detailed documentation, phone records showing Emma's daily check-in calls, visitor logs from his doctor's appointments showing Emma attended every single one while none of you attended any. Receipts for medications, groceries, and care items that Emma purchased for him. Testimony from neighbors who only ever saw Emma visiting. He pulled out a thick folder. Richard was an engineer. He documented everything. If you contest this will, all of this evidence will be presented in court. It will show quite clearly that Emma provided years of care while the rest of the family provided minimal contact. Mom's face was red now. We had busy lives, careers, responsibilities. So did Emma, Mr. Hartwell said. She's a full-time cardiac nurse. She still found time. How long would a contest take? Dad asked. He sounded tired. 6 months to a year, typically. Legal fees would likely run $25,000 to $50,000. And again, based on the evidence, you would almost certainly lose. The court would likely award Emma her legal fees as well, meaning you'd be responsible for those costs on top of your own. So we're just supposed to accept this? Jessica demanded. That's your decision to make, Mr. Hartwell said. But yes, I would strongly advise accepting it. He turned to me. Emma, do you have any questions? I wiped my eyes. When did he decide to leave everything to me? We discussed it about 2 years ago, shortly after his diagnosis. He'd been thinking about it for a while. He told me he wanted to ensure the person who actually cared for him would benefit, not just the people who assumed they'd inherit because of a family tree. He never said anything to me. He didn't want it to affect your visits. He wanted to make sure you were coming for him, not for an inheritance, though he told me he knew that was never your motivation. Fresh tears spilled over. Uncle Richard had known, of course he had. He knew I loved him and that I came every Tuesday because I wanted to, not because I expected anything. This is, Jason muttered. Jason? Mom snapped. What? Emma gets $3 million because she drank coffee with the guy. She did considerably more than that, Mr. Hartwell said. But regardless, this is Richard's decision to make. It was his money, his estate, his choice. What happens now? Dad asked. The estate will go through probate, which typically takes 4 to 6 months. As executor, I'll manage that process. Emma will inherit the house and all assets once probate is complete. The $5,000 bequests to each of you will be distributed first within 30 days. $5,000. Jessica laughed bitterly. After all the years. After all the years of what? I said quietly. Everyone looked at me. All the years of visiting once, of calling on holidays, of treating him like an obligation. How dare you, Mom said. I'm not saying it to be cruel. My voice was steady now. But Uncle Richard was right. You barely knew him. None of you did. You knew he existed. You knew he was family, but you didn't know him. And you did, Jessica challenged. Yes, I knew his favorite book was Lonesome Dove. I knew he cried when his wife died 20 years ago and never really got over it. I knew he was scared of dying alone. I knew he loved the Mariners but thought they'd never win a World Series. I knew he voted for Democrats even though his engineering colleagues all thought he was crazy. I knew he wanted to visit Italy but never did because Aunt Alina died before they could take the trip. I looked around the table. Did any of you know any of that?" Silence. "He was just Uncle Richard," Jason said defensively. "The old guy we saw at Christmas." "Exactly, and that's fine. You had your own lives. I'm not judging you for that. But don't be angry with me because I actually spent time with him." "You're taking advantage of an old man's loneliness," Mom said coldly. "No, I was giving him companionship. There's a difference." Mr. Hartwell closed his portfolio. "Unless there are legal questions, I think we're finished here. Emma, please call my office tomorrow and we'll begin the probate process. Everyone else, you'll receive your bequests within 30 days. We all stood. The silence was crushing. In the elevator, no one spoke. We were all crammed together in the small space, not looking at each other. When we reached the lobby, Mom turned to me. "If you had any decency, you'd split that money with your family." "No," I said. "Number Uncle Richard left it to me. He explained why. I'm going to honor his decision." "You're being selfish," Jessica said. "Maybe. Or maybe I earned it. Either way, it's mine now." I walked away from them, out into the Portland afternoon. My phone started buzzing before I had even reached my car. "Jessica, you're destroying this family." "Jason, this is so messed up." "Mom, we need to talk about this reasonably." "Dad, Emma, call me." I didn't respond to any of them. That night, I drove to Uncle Richard's house. My house now, I supposed, though that reality felt impossible to grasp. It was a modest craftsman bungalow with a covered front porch. The garden Uncle Richard had nurtured for 40 years was untamed. He had been too frail to keep up with it these past few months. I used the spare key he'd given me 2 years prior. "In case of an emergency," Heath had said, "you're my contact." "You should have a key." The house held his scent, a mix of coffee, Old Spice, and aged paper. I stood in the living room and wept. Everything remained exactly as it had been last Tuesday. The coffee maker I'd used to brew our evening cup, the 2 mugs still sitting unwashed in the sink. The book he'd been reading, his bookmark resting halfway through. The photo albums lined up on the shelf, Uncle Richard's entire life captured in pictures. I pulled one down and leafed through it. Uncle Richard and Aunt Alina on their wedding day. Uncle Richard at his graduation. Uncle Richard and Dad as children, perhaps 7 and 10, grinning at the lens. Near the back were more recent photos, mostly of Uncle Richard alone in his garden or reading on the porch. Then I found a section I hadn't known existed, pictures of me and Uncle Richard. Someone must have taken them, perhaps a neighbor. Us sitting on the porch with our coffee, us at the kitchen table, both caught mid-laugh, me holding a watering can while he pointed at a plant. He had saved the photos of our Tuesdays. I sat on his couch, my couch, and cried until there was nothing left. The following 2 weeks were brutal. My family called incessantly. Mom wanted a family meeting to discuss a fair distribution. Jessica left voicemails accusing me of greed and manipulation. Dad sent lengthy emails about family obligations and doing the right thing. Kay just sent angry texts. I didn't reply to any of them. I went to work, did my job, and came home. I ignored my phone. Mr. Hartwell called to guide me through the probate process. He was kind and patient, explaining every step with clarity. "You're handling this well," he assured me. "Richard would be proud. My family hates me. They're upset. They expected something different." "That's not your fault, Emma. You didn't manipulate anyone. You were simply present. That's all Richard ever wanted, someone to be there." 3 weeks after the will was read, Mom showed up at my apartment. "We need to talk," she said the moment I opened the door. I let her in, too exhausted to put up a fight. She sat on my worn couch and surveyed my small apartment with barely concealed disdain. Are you really going to stay here? You're about to inherit millions. I haven't received anything yet. Probate takes months, Ma. She leaned forward. Be reasonable. That money belongs to the family, all of us. Richard was confused toward the end. He didn't understand what he was doing. He wasn't confused. He was perfectly clear. You manipulated him. I visited him every week for 6 years. That's not manipulation. That's showing up. You knew he had money. Actually, I didn't, not precisely. We never discussed his finances in detail. I knew he owned his home and had a pension, but I had no idea about the investments or the specific amounts. And I didn't care. I don't believe you. I know you don't, but it's the truth. I visited Uncle Richard because I liked him, because he was my friend. Because every Tuesday evening for 2 hours, I had someone who truly listened to me. Mom flinched. We listened to you. No, Mom, you don't. You never have. When was the last time you asked about my job, really asked and wanted to know the details? You're a nurse. You work at a hospital. I'm a cardiac care nurse. I specialize in post-surgical recovery. I've been considering returning to school to become a nurse practitioner. Did you know that? Mom was silent. I've been thinking about it for 2 years. I've mentioned it, but you never ask. You're always too busy telling me about Jessica's kitchen renovations or your country club drama. That's not fair. It's entirely fair, and it's fine, Mom. I stopped expecting you to be interested in my life years ago, but don't act surprised that I formed a close bond with someone who was. So, this is our fault. This isn't about blame. It's about choices. Uncle Richard chose to leave his money to me. I'm choosing to accept it. You're choosing to be angry about it. Those are all choices. $3 million, Emma. I know that could change all our lives. You're going to change my life. That's what Uncle Richard wanted. Mom stood up. If you go through with this, your family will never forgive you. Then I suppose my family will never forgive me. She left without another word. For weeks later, Jessica showed up with a lawyer on a Saturday morning. I was still in my pajamas, having just finished a night shift. This is my attorney, Patrick O'Connell, Jessica announced. We're filing a contest to Richard's will. Mr. Brennan looked uncomfortable. Miss Chin, my client believes there are grounds to challenge the will based on undue influence. Hey, I said, too tired for this. We'd like to propose a settlement, he continued. Rather than undergoing expensive litigation, we are prepared to offer you a generous portion if you'll agree to split the estate more equitably. How equitably? 40% to you, 60% split among the other family members. I did the mental math. That would leave me with about $1.3 million, while they split nearly $2 million. No, I said. Emma, be reasonable, Jessica snapped. We're being more than fair. Uncle Richard was clear about his intentions. I'm not negotiating against his wishes. We will win in court, Mr. Brennan said, though he didn't sound convinced. The evidence of undue influence is compelling. What evidence? You had exclusive access to Richard. You isolated him from his family. You are a medical professional who could have easily manipulated his medication or his mental state. I'd like you both to leave now, I said calmly. Emma. Leave or I'll call the police and report you for harassment. They left. 2 hours later, Mr. Hartwell called. Your sister has filed a will contest. I expected this. Don't worry. Should I be worried? No, honestly, they have no case. I spoke with their attorney, he knows it too. He's only doing this because Jessica is paying him, but it will fail. How long will it take? 4 to 6 months for the hearing. The judge will review the evidence and issue a ruling. Based on what we have, I'm confident we'll prevail. And if they lose, they'll be liable for their own legal fees, likely $25,000 or more. The judge might even order them to pay your legal fees as well. Total costs for them could exceed $50,000. That seems like a waste of money. It is, but sometimes people have to learn lessons the expensive way. 5 months later, we sat in Multnomah County Superior Court. Judge Elizabeth Montgomery presided, a woman in her 60s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. Jessica's attorney presented their case, arguing that I'd had unusual access to my uncle, that I'd isolated him, and that my medical background gave me the means to influence his mental state. He had no evidence, only speculation and insinuation. Then, Mr. Hartwell presented our side. He had phone records proving I'd called Uncle Richard daily for 2 years. He had visitor logs from cardiology appointments showing I'd attended all 17 visits, while no other relative had shown up once. There was testimony from his cardiologist stating Richard was completely competent until his final week. 3 neighbors testified they'd only ever seen me visiting, never the rest of the family except for the annual Christmas visit. He submitted receipts for the medication I'd purchased, groceries I'd bought, and the home health aide I'd hired out of my own pocket once Richard became too weak to manage alone. Finally, he presented the letter Uncle Richard had written in his own hand, explaining his decision clearly and rationally. Judge Montgomery reviewed everything in silence before speaking. "I've practiced law for 35 years, she said. I've overseen hundreds of will contests. Most involve legitimate concerns, questions about competency, suspicious circumstances, or unclear intent. This is not one of those cases." She turned to Jessica. "Ms. Morrison, your uncle left a clear, documented explanation for his decision. He was evaluated by a physician and found to be competent. He had every right to leave his assets to whoever he chose. But she manipulated him," Jessica cried. "No," Judge Montgomery interrupted. "She visited him. There is a significant difference." She turned to me. "Miss Chin, the evidence shows you provided consistent, loving care to your uncle for years. You did so while working full-time. You did so without any apparent expectation of inheritance. Your uncle valued that care. He chose to reward it. That was his right." She looked back at Jessica. "If you wanted to inherit, you should have been present in his life. That isn't manipulation on your niece's part. That is a consequence." She banged her gavel. "Contest denied. Richard Sterling's will stands as written. Furthermore, given the lack of merit in this case and the overwhelming evidence to the contrary, I am ordering Miss Emma Chin's legal fees to be paid by the contesting party." Mr. Hartwell leaned over and whispered, "That's another $12,000 they owe you." Jessica stood abruptly and walked out, her face flushed red. Outside the courtroom, Mom and Dad were waiting. "You're really going to make us pay?" Mom asked. "I didn't make that decision, the judge did. You could waive it, show some family compassion." "No," I said, "you chose to contest the will, you lost. These are the consequences." I walked away from them for the second time. 6 months after Uncle Richard's passing, the estate cleared probate. I took possession of the house, the bank accounts, and the investments, $2 million. I sat in Uncle Richard's house, my house, on a Tuesday evening, drinking coffee just as we used to. The place was quiet, perhaps too quiet. Uncle Richard had wanted me to build the life I deserved. I thought about what that required. I called Mr. Hartwell. "I want to establish a scholarship fund for first-generation college students pursuing nursing. $50,000 a year. That's very generous." Uncle Richard paid for his own college working construction. He would have appreciated this. "Please, set it up." and another 100,000 to cardiac research in his name. I made my decisions over the following weeks. I moved into the riverside bungalow, keeping the memories of those Tuesday evenings alive. I enrolled in a nurse practitioner program at Oregon Health and Science University, 2 years part-time, no loans required. I hired a gardener to restore Uncle Richard's garden to its former glory. The scholarship's first recipient was a 22-year-old single mother. She cried when I told her. I cried, too. My family didn't speak to me for months. Then Jason texted, "Hey, can we talk?" We met at a coffee shop. I wanted to apologize, he said. "I was angry and jealous, but you didn't steal anything. You earned it. What changed?" I realized I can't remember a single real conversation I had with Uncle Richard. Every time I saw him, I was on my phone. I didn't care about him, I only cared about what he could give me. We talked for an hour, really talked. "I don't know if Mom and Dad will come around," Jason said, "or Jessica. But I'm glad Uncle Richard left everything to you. You deserved it." A year after his death, Dad called. "Emma, I'm calling to apologize. Your mother and I were wrong. We were angry because we felt entitled, but we hadn't earned it. You did." His voice cracked. I called Richard 4 times a year and visited once. I told myself that was enough, but we weren't close. We were just related. "You had a real relationship with him. That's my failure, not yours." "I loved him, Dad. I know, and he loved you. I'm sorry for how we treated you, for not seeing what you were doing, for choosing anger instead of pride. I forgive you, but I'm not giving back the money." "I know, and I'm not asking. That money is yours." "Richard wanted you to have it. I respect that now." Mom called 2 days later with a more difficult apology. She was trying. Jessica never apologized. 2 years of silence followed until a cancer scare brought us to the hospital. I visited with flowers. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Because you're my sister. Because I'm a nurse, and because I know how terrifying this is." We both cried. It was a start. 3 years after Uncle Richard died, I completed my degree. I took a position at a cardiology clinic specializing in heart failure, the same condition Uncle Richard had. I helped patients understand their medications and their prognosis. I made certain that no one had to face their diagnosis alone. It felt like honoring his memory. I still lived in his house. On Tuesday evenings, I would sit on the porch with my coffee and talk to him about my week, my patients, and my life. The scholarship fund had helped 12 students by then. 3 had already graduated and become nurses. They sent me thank you cards with photos of them in their scrubs. Uncle Richard would have loved that. My family relationships slowly mended. Dad and I spoke every few weeks. Mom was trying. Jason and I rebuilt something authentic. Jessica and I worked on it over coffee. It would never be perfect, but it was something. I thought about Uncle Richard's gift often, not just the money, but what it symbolized. Someone had seen me, valued me, and loved me. He had given me the certainty that I was worth showing up for, that my time mattered, that my care mattered, and that I mattered. That was the real inheritance. The money was merely the proof.